Hello, everybody. How lovely it is to be here, how appropriate it is to be here. This feels a very Bridgerton kind of venue.
It's beyond Bridgerton.
You've probably got used to places like this.
I don't think I'll ever get used to places like this.
When Bridgerton came out, I don't think any of us knew what a massive success it would be. I was a TV critic at the time. Mm-hmm. And I looked up my review, and of course you review things really early on. I did say that Regé-Jean Page was eminently britches-worthy, which I think was a good call. I said that Jonathan Bailey was not half bad. I mean, I did mention some of the ladies, but I was very taken with the actors of Bridgerton, as possibly looking at the audience, you were too. When I saw the first episode, I think actually I saw about 3 episodes that you get in advance. And I thought, you know, some people might say there's a few anachronisms. And at that point in my review, I said, but if you're going to do that, if you're going to expect Bridgerton to be exactly like something that would have happened in the time of George III, that would be a bit like expecting an Adamant music video, to be an accurate representation of an 18th century pirate. So I was quite pleased with that line. But as I say, I could not have known what an amazing success it would be. Could you? Did you think, this is a winner, this is going to go crazy?
Not like that. I mean, I always thought it would do well. I never thought we might flop. You know, for a couple reasons. One, it seemed very fun, it seemed very fresh, it was different, and I knew that there was this huge readership of historical romance readers who were dying for something like this, who had already watched all of Poldark and all of Outlander, which aren't quite historical romances, but have an element of it in it, and now they were actually going to get a historical romance. And so I thought, okay, we're going to have a respectable showing. We're not going to fail. We're going to do okay. And it was already, you know, the most brilliant dream come true just to have it get made, and then to have it explode the way they did. That was, I like to say, I dream big, but I didn't even know how to dream that big.
How involved were you? I mean, a lot of writers, you know, they sell the TV option. Nothing ever happens. Mm-hmm. Usually nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
How involved were you? Did you get more involved as it went on?
I'm very hands-off. So what happens when you're approached by someone in Hollywood to adapt one of your novels, or in my case, 8 of my novels, I always joke with people, like, if you're going to get a movie deal, get it for 8 books. It's great. But the first thing
they ask... 8 times the advance?
No.
Oh.
I mean, but I do get paid for each season. So
yeah.
Where was I? Oh, the first thing they ask you is, are you willing to give up creative control? And I immediately said, yes, take it. I was just very not precious about it. And it was funny, I was talking with Helen Fielding last night. Watch me name drop. And she was like, really, you did? And she couldn't believe it. And I said, look, you know, I knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. And it wasn't even just once in a lifetime, my lifetime. It was once in my genre's lifetime. There had never been a historical romance novel optioned in the way that this was getting optioned. The closest thing we had was Outlander, which is fabulous. I love Outlander, and it has a wonderful romance in it, but it's not a romance novel the way that my books are. I always say, you know, I write squarely within the envelope of my genre. I'm not busting out of the envelope. I like to think I'm doing great things in the envelope, but it is squarely in the genre, and nobody had adapted it before. For a couple reasons. The cynical one is that, you know, Hollywood didn't really think much of romance novels. And if they wanted to do something, especially a historical, well, if they wanted to do a contemporary romance, they just wanted to write it themselves, a rom-com that they wrote themselves. And if they wanted to do something historical, they would do Jane Austen for the 53rd time, because that's immediately prestige. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm here for all 53 Austen adaptations. I love them all. But that's how Hollywood works. And so this was really new and groundbreaking that Shonda Rhimes wanted to do this, and I did not want to mess it up. I wanted to be a delight to work with. That said, it is very easy to take that attitude when the people who are coming to you are Shondaland, which is just one of the best production companies in Hollywood. They have an incredible track record. They align with my values, my moral values, my political values. And can you imagine the hubris of being the person to tell Shonda Rhimes how to make television? I was like, no, she knows what she's doing. And obviously, it was the right choice.
So you were a delight to work with. We also have Kathryn Drysdale, who's in the series, and we'll talk about your role in a little while. I'm sure you were a delight to work with as well.
I thought so.
Kathryn is going to be reading. We've got some readings from the books. So before I introduce that, I mean, you had the amazing Julie Andrews, didn't you, doing voiceover? I mean, were these things kind of happening and you were going, oh my God, because that was special.
When I found out that Julie Andrews was going to be the voice of Lady Whistledown, I stopped breathing for long enough that I legitimately should be dead. Yeah, and my husband, who knows very little about popular culture and just, you know, even he recognized what a big deal that was, and that's saying something. I was just like, I couldn't even speak.
Lady Whistledown, is it true that you weren't sure yourself who it was going to be? I mean, she was a device, and a rather brilliant device.
Yes, so what happened was, I was starting the book, and I was trying to avoid what writers call the info dump, which is where, you know, you've got all this expository information and you need to get it across to the reader, and you're trying to come up with some way to get it out there that isn't terribly awkward. And the worst thing you could do is to set it out in dialogue between two people who would never actually be saying it to each other. You know, when you have the characters going like, oh gosh, do you remember when Mom and Dad died in that terrible crash, and then we went to live with Great Aunt Hortense? Oh my gosh, yes. And she was so mean to us. Oh my gosh, yes. And then we ended up in foster. I mean, you just wouldn't talk to somebody that way. And so, you know, I'm opening with a scene with Daphne and her mother. But what I really needed to say was that, you know, Daphne had 7 brothers and sisters, and the family was named alphabetically, and they're not going to say this to each other because they know this. And somehow I realized that with a gossip columnist, it was literally her job to dump information. And I remember thinking, how has nobody thought of this before? I mean, just in terms of, so she really started out not to be like necessarily a mystery, but really as a way for me to dump all the information out there to people. And then somehow it just became, just sort of flowed that they'd be talking about, well, who is this person? And it turned into a mystery. And I was only a few chapters from the end when I finally decided who it would be. I think it's no longer a spoiler. I think
no.
Raise your hand if you don't know who Lady Whistledown is. Okay, we're good. And
Let's keep secrets.
Okay, because I had, for a while, when it was just in the books, I had to really instruct people to keep it a secret because the books you don't find out till book 4, and so really I didn't want to spoil for anybody. Now I think it's out there. And some of the readers were very upset that it was revealed in season 1 instead of keeping it going till season 4. But the truth is, people would have just Googled it, right? Everybody would have known. So I don't think there's any point in them trying to keep it a secret, and it's much better to work it into the plot.
I expect you have had on occasion to deliver that kind of expository dialogue. I think, again, from when I was a TV critic, there are all these things like, well, you're my sister, so and it's like, you know who your sister is. But anyway, let's hear a bit of Lady Whistledown. She's going to introduce the Bridgerton family, and this is from The Duke and I.
The Bridgertons are by far the most prolific family in the upper echelons of society. Such industriousness on the part of the Viscountess and the late Viscount is commendable, although one can find only banality in their choice of names for their children. Anthony, Benedict, Colin, Daphne, Eloise, Francesca, Gregory, and Hyacinth. Orderliness is, of course, beneficial in all things, but one would think that intelligent parents would be able to keep their children straight without needing to alphabetize their names. Furthermore, the sight of the Viscountess and all 8 of her children in one room is enough to make one fear one is seeing double, or triple, or worse. Never has this author seen a collection of siblings so ludicrously alike in their physical regard. Although this author has never taken the time to record eye color, all 8 possess similar bone structure and the same thick chestnut hair. One must pity the Viscountess as she seeks advantageous marriages for her brood that she did not produce a single child of more fashionable coloring. Still, there are advantages to a family of such consistent looks. There can be no doubt that all 8 are of legitimate parentage. Ah, gentle reader, your devoted author wishes that were the case amid all large families. Lady Whistledown's Society Papers, 26th of April, 1813.
I have to say, that was so good. And what, no. So I get to see the shows before you do. And what I often see they're not quite finished. So, I see things, they've got bits of green screen and blue screen, and they haven't sound mixed everything. And usually we've got Julie Andrews on it. And one time I got an episode, and I guess she hadn't recorded her bit yet, and they just had somebody doing it instead. And it made you realize just how talented Julie Andrews is. Because the person wasn't bad, and it wasn't like they were just phoning it in, they were trying. But you're a pretty close second. Bless you, Julie.
Great channeling of Julie Andrews there. Sorry that she couldn't be here, but,
I would have loved Julie Andrews.
Oh my gosh.
Could you imagine? One of my favorite things is Nicola Coughlan keeps talking about how she job shares with Julie Andrews. That is brilliant.
So why do you think it was such a hit? Is there something to do with, we were all coming out of COVID. I was a TV critic during COVID, and everybody was watching TV all the time. So TV, it is a sexy medium, really, isn't it? It's sort of almost taken over from film. But what was it, do you think, that really appealed to people, and especially young women?
I think it was this show that was, glamorous and pretty. And I always joke you could watch it with the sound off and still enjoy it, and you could watch it with the vision off and enjoy it. Just the sound and the sights of it are so wonderful. And yet these characters are people you can still kind of see yourself in, if you had a lot more money and somebody doing your hair every day. But, they still act in ways and feel in ways that are very relatable. And there's so much on TV that, considered, good TV that's very edgy and dark. And believe me, I love all the edgy, dark stuff. But this was something that was really just happy and joyful and about a happy ending and about finding love and about things that most people are looking for in life. And I think it just gave people something really to enjoy, to watch something that was about seeking happiness without really terrible things happening to people. And I just, it's nice to have a happy show every now and then.
And the character of Daphne, a lot of writers say, oh, I can hear the voice in my head, or this character is speaking to me. Mm-hmm. Do you sort of channel the story through Daphne in a way, at the beginning? Were you really hearing her give her point of view?
I don't remember.
Oh.
So you have to know that I figured this out. I would have written The Duke and I in 1998. The book came out in January 2000, which means I would have had to turn it in sometime the beginning of 1999. So the book was written in 1998, and so I honestly don't recall exactly. But I can tell you, I have written a number of novels, and my novels are written exclusively, they're in the third point of view, and you're only, except for a few of my very early books when I was kind of figuring out what I was doing, you only go in the point of view of the hero and the heroine. You never enter anyone else's point of view. So yeah, half of it is channeling through her, and then half of it, of course, is channeling through Simon.
Exactly. Well, let's hear a little bit of Daphne in another reading. We'll get her voice. This is reading 2.
Okay. Men, she thought with disgust, were interested only in those women who terrified them. No one seemed inclined to court someone like her. They all adored her, or so they said, because she was so easy to talk to, and she always seemed to understand how a man felt. As one of the men Daphne had thought might make a reasonably good husband had said, "Deuce, take it, Daff. You're just not like regular females. You're positively normal." Which she might have managed to consider a compliment if he hadn't proceeded to wander off in search of the latest blonde beauty.
Now, there are many changes that take place in moving from page to screen. Yes. That's part of our talk. And the character that you play is not massive in the books, it's true to say.
Just mentioned. The characters often go to a modiste, and there was a modiste mentioned, Madame Delacroix, but we don't know anything about her, and that's one of my favorite changes, is that they added, I will admit, my most favorite change was the addition of the Queen.
Oh, yes.
Yes. But
she's not in it.
She
really
is not,
at all.
no, she's not in the books at all. No, I don't think she's ever even mentioned.
And that's an amazing performance as well, isn't it?
It's a tour de force. The things that Golda does just with her mouth, I really want them to put her up for Best Supporting Actress Emmy. I think she's brilliant. But the fact that they took the character of Genevieve and built her out as well, I thought was wonderful, because I don't generally get into really building up the characters of the working class in the books, mainly because the way that I do my books, I don't really have room, because they're really much more tightly focused on the two main characters. And so since the show becomes more of an ensemble every season, there's a bit more room to do that, and I really love that they did that with your character.
So I think there's something very interesting about that character, because again, a bit like Lady Whistledown, it allows lots of exposition that isn't really exposition, or she can move things around, make things happen. But given that you couldn't read the books and get a steer, what's it like for you to create a character that then, you've acted in lots of things. You've acted in the RSC, you were in, was it 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps for a long, long time. So what do you bring to the table with a role like this, and what attracted you?
Well, the first thing that attracted me was that I absolutely love the period in which it's set, obsessed with it. Years ago, I did a film called Vanity Fair, and I didn't know you were in that. Yeah. With Claudia? Wasn't Claudia that? No, with Reese Witherspoon.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Yes. In fact, I like to share this story. It's got nothing to do with anything, but I read the book when I was younger, and I knew that there was a mixed-race character in it. And so when I heard they were making the film, I wrote to the casting director and said, I have to play this part. It's always been my dream. And then I got the part.
In Vanity Fair, yes, because there was a lot of talk in the casting of Bridgerton that, it wouldn't have been like that, or the character, the racial makeup of the characters, but actually it would.
But no, there were people.
Yeah,
there were, yeah. Quite often they bought their titles back in those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were real life.
So what is it about the period that you love?
Well, it's because like Julia was saying, why the series was successful, around the time the series came out, for example, we were all in lockdown and people wanted joy and they wanted color. And that period, after it, you had the Victorian period, which is all death and darkness and gloom. And I just think something about the Regency period, the bright colors, the celebration, the facades, the buildings, it was a, I mean, I know we were surrounded by, the wars and everything, but it was a joyful period. And
what I've always thought is that it's kind of this sweet spot where it is far enough in the past that it allows us to romanticize it.
yeah.
Because the truth is, they were at war. There were Napoleonic wars. There were a lot of really terrible things happening. People were dying of cholera all over the place.
Yeah.
And but we can romanticize it in a way that we can't say romanticize World War I or II at this point. That's just too close. And yet it is still close enough to the present that people thought in ways that are fundamentally similar to us. And for example, if you contrast that to, say, medieval times, when there was a mysticism to life and a religiosity to life that had really waned by the time of the Regency. So you can create characters who are a bit more modern in their thinking and then plunk them down into these fun Regency plots that you couldn't have today. I mean, I'm sure that I have written a book where everything could have been solved if somebody just had a cell phone. But so it's kind of this really nice sweet spot, I think.
Yeah.
Did you do any of the writing at all on the scripts?
I did not, no. And part of me wanted to kind of ask, maybe I could get in on the writer's room. But honestly, I think that my presence would have been disruptive. I think that having, and I don't know how they do it on other shows where the author is involved in the writing of the show, but for Bridgerton, it is a very collaborative writing process. They have a writer's room where they, this is to the best of my knowledge, they go over everything together, they come up with the plots, they plot out everything, and then they assign scripts to individual people. I think having the author of the source material in that writer's room would be very disruptive because, they wouldn't want to be hurting my feelings by saying, like, no, we have to axe that, or, I didn't like this line, or, so I think it's probably better not having me in there. And then I did ask, I was like, when they told me they were going to do Queen Charlotte, I thought, maybe I can get in on that writer's room because I didn't write it. And then I found out there was no writer's room for that one because Shonda just wrote the whole thing herself. So there went my opportunity.
Let's talk a little bit about Queen Charlotte and hear a little bit about Queen Charlotte. So this is Agatha Danbury preparing for the wedding, showing the young Lady Danbury preparing to attend the royal wedding of King George III and Queen Charlotte.
If Agatha Danbury had known she'd been attending a royal wedding, she'd have worn a nicer dress. Not that there was anything wrong with her current attire. To the contrary, her gown was the height of fashion, designed by Madame Genevieve, one of the top 3 modistes in London. The fabric was jacquard silk, the color a rich, lustrous gold, that Agatha knew complemented the dark tones of her skin. Her stomacher, too, was a thing of beauty, adorned in the latest style with a single bow over the bosom, and then further dressed with silver embroidery and a magnificent Nigerian topaz. So yes, objectively speaking, her dress was gorgeous. The problem was that it had not been specifically designed to be worn at a royal wedding. And anyone with an ounce of reason knew that if one was to attend a royal wedding, one had to damn well pony up the funds to have a gown customized for the occasion. But as it happened, when Agatha had opened her eyes that morning, she'd not been in possession of an invitation to the nuptials of King George III and his German bride, nor had she any expectation of ever finding herself within spitting distance of royalty. Her side and their side did not mix, ever.
How do you write something set in this era and not sound like a bit Jane Austen light? I mean, you have to do lots of research, but I just love that line, damn well pony up the funds. So you have to make it sound as if these people are contemporary people to their own time, don't you?
Yeah, I will say this particular book was a very different experience for me because it was the first time I'd written a novel with source material. So Bridgerton was the books that made the show, that made another show, that made a book. And when it was decided that they were going to do a spin-off about Queen Charlotte, who ironically was the only main character who wasn't in the books, it's like, oh, well, why don't we make a book based off the show? So Shonda wrote 6 scripts, handed them off to me, and then I had to kind of reverse engineer them into a novel, which was a fascinating process, and one I really, really enjoyed. So, you know, sometimes when I'm with that book, I'm often thinking like, oh, did I write that or did Shonda write that? And I usually say, if it made you cry, that was Shonda. She's responsible for making people cry in that, absolutely. But I think the pony up part, I think that was me, and I don't know. I've been doing it for so long, I think that that's just kind of my writer's voice, is I just kind of slide into it. And
do you immediately have to think, right, now I have to go and do major research about Queen Charlotte?
For that case, yes, because that was also the first time that I've written a novel where one of the main characters was, well, actually, 2 of the main characters were very real people. And it was a little tricky because, you know, I wasn't doing a biography of them. I was writing about them as they existed in the Shondaland world, which is not necessarily history. And it says right at the beginning of the book, this is not a history lesson, and it's not meant to be a history lesson. But yes, I did do a fair bit of research. And it was fun to be able to bring in bits of information about Queen Charlotte that maybe didn't exactly make it into the show. So for example, when Charlotte arrived in England, she actually didn't speak any English. She only spoke German. Luckily, George also spoke German. He was, I believe, the first English king for whom English was his first language. Before that, the ones, well, in his line at least, they'd all been German speakers. So anyway, I have this kind of running thing where she is frustrated with the English language, and it's mostly in her head about, you know, because I love how Germans just keep putting words together to make longer words. It's really fun. They have really great words. So I put, you know, a lot of stuff like that in there. So there's bits of research. You know, I did research on, you know, where she was from. It's actually quite close to Denmark, in Germany, and things like that. But again, because it came to me, that particular case, with a great deal of plot and background, there wasn't, I think, as much research as I would have had to do had I been originating it. With the rest of my books, it's kind of this interesting combo. After you've written enough, I joke that I have a very broad and shallow knowledge of the Regency, meaning there are just many things I don't need to look up before I start writing. I know how you address a duke. I know the basic customs and mores of the time period. I know what type of dresses that they wore. What I generally do is look things up as I go along and as needed. So, for example, I wrote a book called The Other Miss Bridgerton, which is a prequel, and much of it takes place on a ship. And that was when I realized I don't know anything about ships. I mean, nothing, you know, so I'm like going on, I'm like, wow, I just don't know what I'm talking about. And so I did a bunch of research on ships, and then they end up in Portugal, and I was like, don't know anything about Lisbon either. So, you know, so it's really kind of as you go along, and sometimes it's for big things like that, and sometimes it's for very small things, like in It's in His Kiss, which is the 7th Bridgerton book. It's about Hyacinth. Somebody makes a joke, I think it's the hero, makes a joke about Little Bo Peep. And I write it, and I'm like laughing. I'm like, oh, it's so clever. This is so funny. And then I was like, oh my gosh, what's the earliest known reference of Little Bo Peep, right? You know, what if it, and so it turns out it's in Shakespeare, so I'm good. But that's the sort of thing, like a lot of times what you have to look up as you go along are those small items. Another one that I wasn't able to include was the pen is mightier than the sword, which I also assumed was Shakespeare, but it is not. And doesn't it seem like it ought to be Shakespeare?
Who is it?
It is Edward Bulwer Lytton, which, does anybody know who Edward Bulwer Lytton is?
He is...
My sister raises her hand.
It was a dark and stormy night.
Yes.
That's his famous line.
It's
isn't
so funny. So Edward Bulwer Lytton is famous for having written the worst opening line of a novel ever. It was a dark and stormy night, and then it goes on for much, much longer. And in fact, it's so famous, and I encourage you all to check this out. There's a contest each year called the Edward Bulwer Lytton Contest where people enter the worst opening lines of novels. And it's my favorite day of the year when the finalists and the winners are announced because they are so funny. So it always cracks me up that the person who's famous for bad writing also wrote "The pen is mightier than the sword."
Do you have a team of experts? Like if you really need to check something out about a fastening on the back of a Regency dress or something, is there a go-to?
No, wouldn't that be nice? No, that's when you just go down the rabbit hole and spend, hours you absolutely don't have looking for something that is really not necessarily important to the book. That's the crazy thing is, usually with these little details, you could leave out any one of them and the book would be just fine. I mean, I think it's the collection and the aggregation of them all that really helps with the book, especially for somebody like me who's not very descriptive. So I really like peppering in these little things. And I remember one time I was working on a book, and it was, I think, The Lost Duke of Wyndham. And in it, the hero and heroine are looking at an art book. And in my head, they're looking at like this glossy, beautiful, full-color book, like the kind you would buy at the museum store. And then all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, that's not what an art book would look like then. So then I had to research, what does an art book look like? And then somehow I got it in my head that I had to know if the hero could have ever have seen this painting in person. So then I go down this rabbit hole of where the provenance of this painting, like where was it at all times? Who owned this painting? This was so not necessary to the book. I mean, absolutely not necessary, and yet you just can't stop. And meanwhile, you're thinking, I am so late on my deadline, but I have to know. And I don't know a single writer who hasn't done this.
Kathryn, how much do you need to know? I mean, do you go down rabbit holes of research with your characters, or do you let the words take you where you need to go?
I think if it's a job set in a certain period, I absolutely have to be immersed in that world and know as much as I can about it. And I'm a bit of a nerd anyway, so if I can...
A lot of actors say get the shoes right. If you get your character's shoes right, then you get the walk right, then you get the stance right, then you get something physical. I don't know whether you'd agree with that. You're wearing very good shoes, by the way.
Thank you. It's because they're comfy. No, I mean, I agree with that to an extent, yeah, in terms of, if the shoes or the costume aren't right. I mean, we didn't have any problems with Bridgerton, for example, because they make everything from scratch. They, it's all couture,
I'm
handmade.
Sure it's absolutely researched to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Now, last couple of questions, really, we're nearly at the end of the session, but I wanted to ask, have you ever, I'm sure people get in touch and say, you got this wrong, or you got that wrong, or they wouldn't have said this, or they wouldn't have said that.
Oh, yes.
Even if they are wrong, I mean, do people...
Yes.
Get in touch and bossily put you right on things?
So in the beginning, it was people telling me I got things wrong, and usually they were right. Occasionally they were wrong, and now when I get something wrong and somebody calls me on it, 95% of the time it's that I have gotten something wrong against my own universe. I've put somebody somewhere where they couldn't be because in a previous book I had already said that they were off in the country or something like that. And so that's generally what I get called on. And in fact, the classic case of this, well, I suppose the classic case of this are Eloise Bridgerton's changing eye color. And, all these people were like, you got this wrong, because in this book you said they were gray, and now they're green, or vice versa, or whatever. And the funny thing is they were absolutely right, I got it wrong. But if you go back 2 more books, I said they were blue, and nobody caught that one. So I'm like, so there. But there's another one, and this is in a book called Just Like Heaven, where I was just kind of making this joke where, you know how you'll be trying to describe someone to somebody else, you're like, oh, you know who I'm talking about, you know, his cousins, friends, fiancés, aunts, one of those. And I thought, well, surely people did that in the Regency times too. So I had somebody saying, oh, you know, it's his wife's sister, whatever. And clearly they're talking about Colin Bridgerton, but they don't mention him by name. Okay, and it's an Easter egg for people who had read the Bridgerton series. And if you hadn't read the Bridgerton series, it's completely meaningless, right? And then at the end of the book, I decided to bring Colin in as just a secondary character, another fun Easter egg for people, that, you know, he just happens to be at a party, and this person's at a party, and they're talking with him. But the thing is, the thing at the beginning only works if he's already married to Penelope, and at the end of the book, he was single. Okay? Now, I feel the need to point out that if this book existed in its own universe, I have done nothing wrong, because I did not mention him by name, okay? So if you've never read another book, there is no error within this book. However, within the greater world of my writing, yeah, there's a mistake, and I did not catch it. My sister, who's sitting over there, who reads all my books, didn't catch it. My editor didn't catch it. The copy editor didn't catch it. I heard from readers 3 hours after the book went on sale. So at that point, you just have to say thank you for loving it that much. And I don't think I ever bothered to change that. I might have changed Eloise's eyes. Because sometimes you can fix some things in later copies, but that one I was like, we're leaving it, it's fine.
I think with things like you couldn't have gone from there to there and the way that you say that it happened because there wouldn't, you know,
oh,
that
for
sort
sure.
of thing.
Oh, yeah. I had people getting from, I think, Cornwall to London way too fast in one of my earlier books. And that's something I still, you know, that's the one thing that...
Does it bother you a bit? Because I sometimes think, well, it is fiction.
It is fiction, but, you know, no, I think you owe it to the reader to try to get things right. And, you know, and that's one of the ones that always gets me every single time. I'm like, oh my gosh, why is it so hard for me to remember how long it takes to get anywhere? And I'm always looking up, like, how fast can a horse move? And, like, how good were the roads? And can anybody tell me, you know? And so, yeah, I do think you owe it to the reader to at least try. And my mantra is that every book that I have ever written was the best I could do at the time that I did it. And, you know, maybe I could have done it better another time, but I can honestly say I have given readers my best at the time that I did it.
Are you getting better? Are you getting faster?
Oh, I'm definitely not getting faster. I think I've definitely gotten better since the beginning. Am I getting better now? I don't know. I find myself in a place where I'm kind of interested in writing kind of different structure or changing the how of how I write, which was why Queen Charlotte was so fun for me, because again, I'd never had source material before, and you know, I'd be working along and I'd be saying, oh my gosh, I just wrote 10 pages so fast, and then I realized what I've actually done is just like retyped like 6 pages of Shonda's dialogue, you know, because if you're going to put you want the dialogue to match the show. So it is fun for me to come up with some different types of things to write as well.
So season 4, when is that happening?
Not allowed to say.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Not allowed to say.
Okay.
And I always do tell people when if I don't know, and I would tell you if I did know, I would tell you that I did know. So I will be honest with you, I do know, but I'm not allowed to say.
We do, however, have a little bit of a sneak peek in a way, because it's based on an offer from a gentleman, the 3rd book in the series, so we'll hear a little bit. But
be clear, this is from the book, not the script.
This is from the book. It's from the book.
Okay.
But just to get people in the mood. So it opens at a masquerade ball. Can you oblige us, Kathryn, with our final reading?
Yes.
So this is Benedict first lays eyes on Sophie during a masquerade ball at Bridgerton House.
This scene, I think, is in the little sneak peek that they already released. So now you can sort of know the background.
Okay, so paint the picture.
Or go look it up online afterwards.
he heard a low rumble of whispers rippling across the ballroom behind him. He knew he ought to keep going and get this dance over with, but God help him. His curiosity got the better of him, and he turned around and found himself facing what had to be the most breathtaking woman he'd ever seen. He couldn't tell if she was beautiful. Her hair was a rather ordinary dark blonde, and with her mask tied securely around her head, he couldn't even see half of her face. But there was something about her that held him mesmerized. It was her smile, the shape of her eyes, the way she held herself and looked about the ballroom as if she'd never seen a more glorious sight than the silly members of the ton all dressed up in ridiculous costumes. Her beauty came from within. She shimmered, she glowed, she was utterly radiant, and Benedict suddenly realized that it was because she looked so damned happy. Happy to be where she was, happy to be who she was. Happy in a way Benedict could barely remember. He had a good life, it was true, maybe even a great life. He had 7 wonderful siblings, a loving mother, and scores of friends. But this woman knew joy, and Benedict had to know her.
Brilliant, well done. You introduced this phrase, the ton. I mean,
Oh, no, I didn't make
made
it up.
that fashionable.
Yes,
Where did it come from? Were you reading things like newspapers and gossip sheets of the era?
I read a great deal of Georgette Heyer. And the ton, I've heard different not derivations, or origin stories of it, it's like the bon ton, or the ton is like sort of the 1,000, whereas the ton 2,000, like most, fashionable people. I'm not exactly sure how it came about. I just knew it was there, and so I used it.
I think it just became a phrase from the series.
Yeah, now everybody seems to know.
Everybody absolutely loved it. What's next for you? You're probably not allowed to say, are you? Let's face it.
Well,
Can
it's
you
not about the
reveal
show.
anything of what you're up to?
For the show, no. They, Kathryn can, agree with me or attest to the fact that they are secretive. Anytime I get a script, it's watermarked with my name across it, and so no, that I can't do. In terms of my writing career, I've been taking some time off, actually, which has been really nice, and really digging in a little bit more into philanthropy and political activism. I just finished 18 months as the national ambassador for a group called Every Library, which is it's a United States-based group that was originally founded to mobilize voter support for public and school libraries, but has unfortunately had to take a turn to fighting book bans. So I've been very active on that. And now I'm the Goodwill ambassador for a wonderful group called Landesa, which I encourage you all to look into, which is a global, it's an international NGO. It's based in Seattle where I live, which is really nice. And they work all around the world using the law to help secure land rights for the rural poor. And one thing that I've learned is that, we always think, okay, well, to help people, we need to get in there, we need to get them food, and we need to get them medicine and water, and this is all absolutely true, but you need to go one step underneath that and get people secure rights to the land on which they live and work. Especially when it comes to women, because there are many countries where the culture is that the women do not actually have any legal rights to the land they're on. It belongs to the husband, and if something happens to him, very frequently his family swoops in, takes it, and she's out. And so Landesa goes in and really does a lot of work to help solve that problem. Okay, I'm getting 1 second. This really elegant solution that they did, there was state in India where the boilerplate contract for when land changed hands, and there's echoes of like Bridgerton and Regency times in his when women couldn't own land, and just like the Bennet sisters who couldn't inherit Longbourn. But so there's one line, and so if you bought property, the man always signed, because of course the husband would sign. Why would the wife sign if there's a husband there to sign, right? And so they managed to change the boilerplate contracts. Now there are 2 lines. And now when a couple goes to buy land, nobody says to the woman, you can't sign, like, oh, because, well, there's your spot. And now all of a sudden she is co-owner of this land, and if her husband dies, his family can't come in and kick her off. And this is obviously a very simple thing that they're doing compared to everything else, but it's a really wonderful organization. They've helped 720 million people worldwide, and yeah, so please, look up Lendesa, give, whatever. I had to give the plug. And we are having our second Regency tea for women's rights in Seattle soon, and hopefully we'll take it on the road, and maybe we'll be back in England and you can come to that.
Wonderful. An unexpected but brilliant answer. We have come to the end of the session. Thanks very much for coming along, everyone. But please put your hands together for brilliant Julia Quinn and brilliant Kathryn Drysdale.